Hi, Brian. Okay. Hello, everybody. I would like to welcome all of you from different countries, different time zones, and those who will be watching this recording later. Welcome to our next PM talk. This subject is very interesting, and I think all of you who are attending or listening this live happen to work remotely, right? Okay, my name is Lela Machaidze. I am project management professional and I am in this field for more than 70 years. I'm working with different companies from all over the world, and I have mentoring, training, and different sessions conducting for the different students. If you want to hear more about me, you can visit my site as well as LinkedIn, Instagram, and Facebook. I'm posting some the interesting tips and tricks so they can be useful and beneficial to you. I would like to say a couple of words about today's logistics. Today's session will continue for 45 minutes, followed up with 15 minutes Q&A session. Feel free to post your questions in the chat and we will be answering them later on. The recording of this video will be posted on the YouTube channel so you can watch it later or share with your friends and colleagues. This is my pleasure to present you with one of the best-selling book author for today's session. And actually, I wanted to share with you a great story. I think it's a great story. As all of you, I'm also working remotely probably since last March. And I have struggled, honestly. I have struggled with organizing teams and how to work with them. So then I started searching for the smart solution by smart people. And as everybody, most of you, I also went to Amazon. And as most of you probably are doing, I have searched for the book with the best views and the reviews and so on. And this is how I happened to meet with Alexis. She wrote the book about how to lead remote teams, and she is one of the leaders. She is acquisition manager for DoD, and she's leading remote teams herself. So we call people like ourselves practitioners. Welcome, Alexis, to this talk. I'm really glad to have you here.
Hi, everyone. Yeah, I'm excited to be here with a bunch of project managers. I think you guys are really the people who are going to benefit a lot from this book and the ideas that we're going to talk about today. It's really meant for people who are doing the hands-on work, actually leading the teams and executing your missions and your company's goals. So I think it'll be a great talk. One disclaimer I do have, so I am an employee of the Department of Defense. So just as we get started, keep in mind anything I say is my own personal opinion and does not reflect the views of the United States Air Force, the Department of Defense, or the United States of America. I know we have a lot of different countries and time zones on here, so it's awesome to get a lot of different people involved in this.
It's so nice, and we all know that we have acquisition person online. As she started with the disclaimer, great. So nice to have you here. And we usually start our discussion with the question, what has inspired you to write a book?
So I think I actually just kind of got lit up about this in a really short amount of time. It actually started in the fall of 2020. So before the pandemic, I was on a supply chain logistics team. So I had a team of 9 people under me, and we were awarding contracts, getting parts delivered for the defense sector. And then in the middle of the pandemic, so we transitioned to remote and just kind of hit the ground running. I was used to doing a lot of things digital with my team, even though it wasn't normal for the government at the time or for my organization at the time. A lot of people were really very in-person, very face-to-face interaction. So the digital aspect was kind of new for us, but me being a millennial and being kind of comfortable in that environment, I was able to transition my team over to the digital environment pretty quickly. And then about a couple months into it, I actually moved to a new organization, still in the Air Force, but just a different program office in the Air Force, same location, but it was all remote. So nobody was in the office, and that was quite the experience to transition everything, learn a new team, learn a new mission, learn a new weapon system, all while working from home, which has its own unique set of challenges. And I think that's why we're all here to learn more about how to handle these challenges and overcome them. So this is really my reflections of the different comparisons between those two organizations. Everybody handles things differently. And then realizing after a few months into it, I was one of the few people who was actually thriving and succeeding in the digital environment, which I think is interesting, given that, several months in, several people were still struggling. And I think even over a year into this, many people are still looking for the answers and how to overcome some of these challenges, especially when we face maybe the barrier of digital communication versus person-to-person communication. So that was really what inspired me to write the book. And I had always wanted to write my own book. I'm a really avid reader, so that was kind of a bucket list item. And then when I started talking about leading remote teams and different best practices to use with some of the different team leads in my organization, they said, hey, this is something we all need, and you definitely need to share this further. And that was when I got the idea to put it all in a book. So that was kind of the inspiration behind it.
So as I understand it, this is your first book, or is it?
Yes, this is my first book.
Mm-hmm. Wow. So this is your first book, and it's already bestseller. So it's a good sign. It's a good sign that you continue writing books and putting your observations on the paper. Because honestly, I read your book and I really found it really inspiring and practical. So just in the row, you mentioned that for me, being as a millennial, so how it feels different for you being a millennial and for others not millennials like myself working in the remote team?
So I think one of the stereotypes that's accurate about millennials, I will not say that all of them are accurate, but one that is that we're really comfortable in the digital environment. So using things like social media, using things like Zoom and video calls and instant messaging as something that we're comfortable with and we are just used to functioning in. So it's not abnormal, it's just another way that we can communicate. So I think that level of comfort as a millennial really helped me to adapt into, hey, we're going to hold our meetings via video call and share the slides over a screen. We already had a few people that were teleworking. They were actually allowed to telework one day per week before the pandemic ever happened. So one of my team members actually teleworked on the day that we had our team meeting. So for her, I was like, hey, we have this new application. We use Microsoft Teams as one of our applications. And I was like, hey, we can, I can share this up on the screen. We can have a dial-in number on the conference room. Everybody else can sit around and see it face to face. She can be on her laptop from home and still be able to participate in the meeting. So that was just kind of one of those examples that I was doing and most of the other people in the government weren't doing. So a lot of the government employees are older generations. I think over 50% of the government workforce right now is actually eligible to retire within the next 5 years. So it's a little bit scary for personnel planning, but also just kind of goes to show you the generations that we're dealing with when it comes to digital technology. There was actually a couple members on my team that were used to desktop only, printed a lot of things out on paper, and I had to help him walk him through, how do you set up a VPN? How do you get everything that you need on your laptop that was on your desktop? How do you log into these applications and make sure that your showing is online so people can talk to you while you're at home? All these different things. Some of us might take for granted because we've kind of adapted to technology as it came along, but a lot of people are really resistant to that technology change. So I think being able to be patient and teach that to your team was really important to helping everybody thrive in the remote environment.
That really makes me wonder, how are you teaching them to use the remote devices when you are remote? Because the other day I have read that there are trainings to teach pupils how to use Zoom via Zoom. So it's like if person cannot use the Zoom, how how we will teach the person to, so how you manage to do that?
Yeah, so that's a challenge. One person, I mean, when we first started, I actually sat down with him in person before we fully left the office and, walked him through, this is how you do each different thing on your laptop. This is where you access that. And these are like the steps that you need to walk through. Some other people I've had while I was working from home and they weren't sure how to get their team's application up and running. So basically it was just like a phone call and I was looking at it from my computer and I could see, okay, click on this, this is what you click on next. And then I would kind of look at it on my desktop and see, what is the next step and really, really walk it through step by step and see, okay, what area on the screen you have to click, because sometimes you need to break it down that far just to make sure that everybody's getting up to speed and figuring out how to use the same technology.
This is very interesting because I know some of the people who are attending right now this call. I know them in person. They have changed their job while we already were in the lockdown. So for them to get acquainted or lead the teams that they have never met before, it was quite a challenge. So they could not sense how they respond, how they are, how literal they are, how to the technology. So you have to somehow know that person to advise or to do something. So you mentioned that you sat down. Initially, I thought that you physically sat down, but then you just said that he showed me the phone, how it works. So it's pretty tiring, right?
Yeah, sometimes you can feel like you're repeating yourself over and over, but once they get the hang of it, then and practice it a few times, it usually goes pretty smoothly.
Mm-hmm. So I want to ask a couple of questions about the techniques, how you wrote the book, and then go to the part from your book, because I have specific chapters that which were really interesting from the management part and leading. Actually, you use leading more in your book as a word, not managing, right?
Yes.
Yes.
So actually, a mentor of mine several years back said when I was first going to become a commissioned officer and really transition into a leadership role in the Air Force, he said, leading and managing are not the same things. You lead people and you manage programs. So if it's a program or a thing, you can manage it, but people, really, you're not managing people, you're leading people. And there's a difference where managing is more of the tactical, just getting tasks done, that type of thing, where leading people is more of the transformative leadership, how you react, how you interact with them, more of like the soft skills.
I see. So going back to the writing the book, have you had any specific agenda, schedule, or tactics? How you wrote it? You mentioned that I wrote it so quickly. So it took you how many days? You mentioned?
So it was about 3 weeks, so 21 days. And I actually had a deadline because I was going to be getting laser eye surgery. So I knew I wouldn't be able to look at a screen for several weeks after that. So I really wanted to get it done and off to the editor before I hit that hard deadline. So from the time I came up with the book and kind of outlined it, I did like a mind map of all the different content areas that I wanted to cover and kind of the subpoints underneath those content areas. And then after I got that out, that took me probably 2 days. And then after that, I got up every single morning. I'm an early riser, so I usually like to get my most productive activities done in the morning before I even start my day. So usually for 1 to 2 hours before work is when I would write. So 4 to 5 in the morning or 4 to 6 in the morning. Made for some early mornings, but that's usually when I get into my groove. I'm uninterrupted. It's before anybody else in my house gets up. So that's really the best time. And it was, 1 to 2 hours every single morning before work. On the weekends, I would maybe get 2 or 3 hours in and really just let the ideas flow. With nonfiction books, usually if you can get that outline in the mind map and all the different topics that you want to talk about and like some bullet points under each one, then you can, when you're actually writing the book, it's actually pretty easy to just let the words flow. And you'll find in my book, it's a really conversational tone, very peer-to-peer level, us talking about, what works for me, how to do things better. And I try to keep that really kind of real, light conversational tone throughout the book. It's just as if I'm talking to you.
it really feels like that if somebody, a friend of you, is giving you the experiences. And actually what is really interesting, you gathered all these observations and your experience about leading the remote team, but it really takes a courage and guts to sit down and write a book as a book. I'm sure lots of attendees here have a huge experience already from the remote work, but it's really something really, you have to have supporters. Has your colleagues supported you, your family, friends? How it felt?
All of the above, actually. So one thing that I wanted to do to kind of test this out before I actually got into all of the effort of putting the words on paper and writing the book itself was testing out the idea. So it's kind of like when you would launch a new product, you want to test the concept and see if it has interest, if it has legs, and if it can go somewhere. So one thing I did was with my supply chain organization that I was in before the pandemic started, and that was kind of where I started learning these remote leadership techniques. I went to the leads and I said, would you guys be interested in a training about how to lead remote teams in this pandemic and how to really transition and work well in the digital environment and transition all of your team meetings and different activities and communicate digitally versus person to person? And they said, heck yeah, we would love that. We could definitely use some help in that area. So I basically did a PowerPoint training, 1 hour, and we went through, and it was basically just the bullet points that later became the book. So it was all of the different tactics, techniques, communication tools, kind of why we need to care about leading remotely and why we can't just wait until we go back into the office. That was the refrain I kept hearing over and over for like the first 4 months. They were like, oh, well, we'll just wait to do that until we go back in the office. And I was like, you guys don't understand, like this might be a while. And now 1.5 years in, we can see that it's definitely been a while. We can't just put things on hold for our companies and our organizations for well over 1 year. That doesn't work. So tested it out through that training and then got a lot of feedback, and most of it was very positive, very much that it was really needed, and they really benefited from the content and the training. So I tested that idea out first, and a lot of those were colleagues and close friends that I developed over the couple of years that I was in supply chain. And from that feedback, that really encouraged me to make sure that, you know, I got everything on paper and wrote the book, and it kind of fueled that fire. And then I was also talking to some close friends and family members. My mom has always been my biggest cheerleader, and I also have an aunt that works in project management as well. So those guys were all cheering me on and very excited about the remote work aspect of it. So definitely had a lot of support from friends and family, and it really helps to have that support too, because the imposter syndrome definitely, I think everybody's probably experienced that at some point. For women, it's really prevalent. Is like, you know, what do I have to offer? Am I really an expert? And then I kind of thought to myself, you know, all the senior leaders in my organization aren't very comfortable with working remotely. They're not really sure how to handle this, and they really didn't trust remote work to start with. And as we went through, most of them were really pleasantly surprised at how productive everybody was and how everybody was staying safe. So from that perspective, I was like, you know what, I do have something to share, because we're learning how to do this well. And I can share the perspectives of being really comfortable and using that digital technology to work remotely, and then deciding, okay, how can we become better and more collaborative and communicate better through the digital medium?
I see.
So it was definitely, yeah.
Actually, it will give probably our participants good idea, because all of them can do the training at their work and just teach some of the tips and tricks which they read or just they come up with themselves. Yeah, it will be nice to mock up for the book as you did.
Yeah. It can really help you give an outline and then test the idea as well. And I think your colleagues are a great group of people that you're usually really comfortable with. Like this group, I felt very non-threatened by, and I felt like I could trust them because I knew every single one of them really well and had worked with them for a while. So I trusted them to be honest with me and say, you know, whether these ideas were good or whether they were just repetitive, and we didn't need another, you know, book on that or anything else. But yeah, it was a good training, and it's really easy to just approach them and be like, hey, I have some ideas to share, some things that we could talk about. can we open this conversation? Is it okay if I practice this training? And it's kind of going above and beyond your job description sometimes as well, which is a good leadership practice.
Great. So remote work. Let's start with the beginning. You have one of the first chapters where you mention to be likable. So to be successful, in order for the participants to understand, one of the actually characters and skills that Alexis is mentioning is likable. What it means to be likable to you, and what stage you have to show it, and how you show it, and what other skills probably you will need to lead remote teams successfully. So floor is yours.
Yeah, so as you mentioned, likability is really important, and you want to be, that kind of stems into being approachable. So in an office, you want to have like that open door policy. You obviously want your team to come to you with any issues they might have, because it's way better to learn about an issue when it's really early in the stages and it's easier to fix, rather than wait until it blows up into something that's really, really hard to resolve, whether that's conflict between team members or maybe something that's going on wrong with your project or your program that needs to be addressed early. So you want to be approachable, but then when you put the barrier of everybody's dispersed in their home office and there's like that digital wall between you, it's even harder to be approachable. And if your team has the perception that you're really busy, or you're kind of a grump and you're not easy to just reach out and initiate that conversation with, it's going to be really hard for them to come to you. It's already, the digital barrier is it's hard to get through and be intentional and initiate that step. So likability becomes a lot more important. So this isn't like you need to be everybody's best friend, but you should know them on a relatively professionally intimate level, let's say. So you should know, about their family situation, about their work life, what their hobbies are, just these different things that shows that you care about them as a person. That's going to go a long ways towards them feeling a connection to you and feeling like they can approach you. So that likability is really important to, again, opening your door, making sure that they can reach out and initiate contact with you. And then the other part of that as a team leader is you should be in contact with them regularly as well, so that they feel like they can just, call you or send you a message or send you an email and get a time to be on your calendar and have that conversation about something if they need to.
So when I read this book, does it mean that I should smile when they see me? Should I have the cameras on all the time, or specifically how should I behave? So you cannot say you can say, obviously, I am approachable, you can always contact me, but what you say and what people do, it's usually a little bit different. How you encourage them? So you give them call every once a day or every twice a day, or how would you do that?
I think once or twice a day is a little bit much. Maybe once a week or once every other week is really enough, especially if they're self-prioritizing what their tasks are and what they're getting done. Once a day might be a little bit like micromanaging and might feel a little bit too overbearing, I guess. But yeah, smiling, being positive when you're on video is a great thing to use, especially if you haven't been working together person to person, like in the same location before. If you haven't actually met each other face to face, then video is really nice. And it's nice occasionally, if you haven't seen each other in a while, to just see somebody's smiling face. That can make a big difference, and you can pick up on the nonverbals as well. That being said, I think some of the benefits of working remotely is like maybe you don't have to put on really fancy clothes and makeup and do your hair every day if you don't have to be on video. So you don't always have to be on video, especially if you're talking to the same people over and over. You get to know their mannerisms and kind of understand whether they're joking or not, or kind of what they mean behind their words. As you work with people more often, you get to understand those nuances. So I wouldn't say video is required all the time, but sometimes it is nice, especially if you haven't met that person or worked with them before.
Well,
Was there another part of that?
Helps. Yeah, it always helps if you have worked with the person, so they know you're like from different side. They work with you in the same environment. That's always helps. How do you think when you first build the team, remote team, you happen to have that in your experience, how you start the building your remote team? What are the steps you would follow or you would recommend to follow?
So the team that I joined remotely was already established, and I was basically just kind of a plug and play member that was replacing somebody else who was leaving. So what I really did at first to kind of open the lines of communication again. So kind of the downfall of being the new person on a remote team is unless like your supervisor or upper manager has introduced you to everybody, they don't know you're there. Your stakeholders don't know who this new person is. They have no clue what your name is, what your email is, your phone number. They don't know how to get in touch with you. So unless you're reaching out and telling them, they don't know that you're the person to contact. So, and especially on project management, a lot of times we are the focal point towards the external stakeholders and the other internal stakeholders as well. And you're the point of contact and the person they need to go to. So they need to know who you are, how to contact you, how to get in touch with you. So one of the first things I did is I asked my predecessor, who are the people that I'm in contact with on a regular basis? What are some of the projects you're currently working on with them? And then I sent a personal one-on-one email to every single one. And I said, hey, my name's Alexis. I'm replacing John on this project. And, I understand you guys were working on this. I'd like to hear a little bit more about where you're at currently and, what the action items are to keep moving things forward. I introduced like a little bit about my personal background. So I said, I'm in Utah. I have 2 dogs. I like to go hiking in the mountains and running are some of my hobbies. And just to kind of open up and, divulge a little bit of myself to encourage them to share a little bit about themselves as well. And I shared my background. So some of my different experience coming into the organization and what I had to offer. And then, ask them to share, like I said, what they're working on and what the next steps were. And I think that just opening up the communication and saying, hey, I'm here if you need me, if you need to come to me with any questions or anything pertaining to this project, let me know and I'm here for you. I think that went a long ways towards really accelerating getting started early rather than having like this 3-month time period where they didn't know who to go to because the old guy left and they didn't know who the replacement was yet. So I think as a project manager on a new remote team, especially inserting yourself into the team and getting to know your immediate team members should probably be like a one-on-one phone call or a video call just to get to know them. And then for your external stakeholders, an email with a little bit of that information, introducing yourself would probably suffice. But really you want to insert yourself, let people know you're there, what your role is, and how to get in touch with you.
All right. And you mentioned very important topic, start openness with you. So it means that when you are leading the team, when you have to work with the stakeholders, you introduce yourself, but you put it in an open manner. So you have also contributing to this openness, right? It's amazing. Good. And you mentioned that once you introduce yourself, then are stages when you have to start collaboration and build trust. How you do that? Build trust in the remote team, because usually the projects are very short projects, especially with the agile and here hybrid sometimes. But how you do that? How you build the trust with the remote team?
So I think the first part is we sort of established that with the likability and introducing yourself. If you can divulge some information about yourself and your hobbies and your interests, you might find a point of connection with them. So that can kind of start to build a rapport and a bond with which you can start to build your trust on. So once you kind of connect with them a little bit, and don't be so rushed to jump right into the work that you forget that part, because that can be really important to kind of establishing a relationship with your coworkers. And while we don't need to spend a lot of time on that, you should at least touch on a few things to get to know them first before you jump into things. And trust is one of those things that has to be earned, right? You can't just have that trust right off the bat. I mean, if you have a common background, you might trust a person a little bit and feel like you've known them just because you have a common background. Like for me being in the military, I know that like most military members I can trust because we've had some common experiences in our past, even though we haven't known each other before. So you already kind of feel a little bit like family. But establishing those common bonds can be really helpful, and then you can work on that. So doing what you say and saying what you're going to do can go a long ways towards building your trust as well. So be the type of person that is going to follow through on what you say you're going to do, because if they can't trust you, really, quite frankly, if they can't trust you to do what you say you're going to do, then are they going to come to you again? Are they going to ask for your help again? Probably not. And if they're not asking for your help, that means other people on the team are probably shouldering more than their fair share of the workload, for sure.
Right. And doing it remotely, doing it physically is really difficult. When we say it, it sounds so easy, but it's really hard to do in reality. Earlier, you mentioned that we have to discover the challenges and problems and issues at the early stage, so we solve them. But usually you can sense it when you sit in the same office, or you hear it, or you bump into somebody and who is worried in the corridor and tells you something. But here you don't have this interaction, and you are somehow just getting into deeper, and are you asking the questions, do you have a problem? Is it the technique you're using, or how? Is there any techniques where they come up with their issues they have?
So are you asking like about team members coming to you with issues?
Team members, yes.
Okay, yeah. So I would be proactive in asking for that. So we do a regular team meeting at least once a week. In my book, I talk about the idea of a stand-up meeting. So at the beginning of the week, covering, your topics for the week. What are the projects, sub-projects that you're working on? What are the different tasks that are your priorities to get done? What's the most urgent to move your program forward? Those types of things, if you're establishing all that at the beginning, and then having each person go around and say, okay, this is what I'm working on this week, or this is really important that I need to get done. That way, as a team lead, you know what they're working on. And if you're their supervisor or manager, that's also really helpful, right? Because you know that they're going to be gainfully employed for the week, and that they're going to have enough to fill up their time and make sure that they're doing their part for your company. But it also gives you the opportunity as a leader to say, are there any obstacles to you being able to do what you need to do this week? Is there any resources that you need? Do you need another person to help you with that? All those different things could be obstacles to them being able to finish their task on time. So it's a really good opportunity during either your team meeting or your stand-up meeting to ask those questions and say, are there any obstacles to you completing this next task? And that gives you the opportunity as the leader to build that trust. If you do need to help them out, give them some additional resources for you to be able to connect them with the resources that they need to get that done. I think that's a really great opportunity to remove some of those obstacles for them. And then also, like, if somebody's not gainfully employed, if they don't have enough to keep them busy during the week and make sure that they're working on the activities that matter, maybe somebody else is overburdened and maybe they could help them with that project or take on some of their tasks. I think it's a good way to help lead your team and then manage the resources across to make sure everybody's being the most effective with their time.
I see. And when you came new to this group, which were already built and working on the project, they most likely had some rules already established. Have you brought new rules to the team, and what were they and how they were received by the group? Remotely, it might be different doing this.
Yeah, so I'm not sure if I brought any new rules. They already kind of had a regular tempo as far as their team meetings, and that was where I learned the stand-up meeting, as the supervisor before me was doing that on Monday mornings, and I thought that was just brilliant, and a lot more people should honestly be doing it. So stand-up's not my idea. I take ideas that work from different people and then kind of repackage them and share them. I think that's really what a lot of program management is taking the good ideas that work and sharing them forward. I think one thing that I definitely brought in was expectation management. And I think that's really important as a team leader and as a project leader as well. So managing the expectations, particularly in the remote work environment, of what someone can expect from you during that day or that week, or, you know, if they want to task you with a new project. So I might be taking ideas and directions from 5 different people, and they don't know everything else that's on my plate. So being able to say, I'd love to work on that project for you, or I'd love to get that document done for you. However, I have XYZ on my plate before that, that's a higher priority. So I won't be able to get that to you until next week. Being able to manage those expectations and communicate that up front, I think, was something that I brought from my previous position forward to this team that has really helped, especially managing the expectations in the remote environment, because you can't see what people are doing. You don't know if they're sitting at their desk, you know, working away for 8 or 10 hours a day, or if they're checking on their computer once in a while and going doing something else because they're at home, you know. So having those expectations and being able to clearly communicate what you're working on and what you expect your schedule to look like, I think can go a long ways towards, again, building the trust on your remote teams as well.
If I understood correctly, and I will check my understanding, the expectations log or expectations list is almost the same as a task list, which should be done and indicates the how and who is responsible for that. Is it, do I understand it correctly?
I think expectations are maybe a little bit more of a soft skill than a task list. So tasks are very concrete. We need to get these things done. Expectations are more how and when you think they're going to be done, and making sure that the other person that you're working with understands the time and the scope and the scale of that. So I think expectations management is more of a leadership and a person-to-person aspect, as far as how you plan to work with them and what your timeline looks like as far as how you plan out and handle your work, versus like, these are all the things that we need to get done. It's okay, I have other priorities on my plate. I have to do these 2 things first. I can't get that to you until Friday, or I can't get that to you until Monday. Those types of things are more of the managing expectations. And I think that's kind of a project management tool, as well as managing your stakeholders and their expectations as well. So that they don't have unrealistic expectations of, you should respond to my email within an hour because I'm the most important thing. Well, you might not actually be the most important thing to that project manager. They might have 3 other people they're reporting to as well. So I think, yeah, that's where the expectations management part comes in.
It really reminds myself at the beginning when I was texting my team at the 1 a.m. or 12 p.m. And then there was like, when should we have a line where we work, when we have the work? So the next question is that how you monitor all the progress and expectations. So you mentioned in your book to keep a balance, yeah? Keep a goal middle, so you are not micromanaging, as well as not letting person that I don't care what you do. I'm sorry for this, but still, so how you keep this balance?
So I think there's 2 parts of this. One is that expectations management that we just talked about. And then the other part is working into like performance management and making sure that the project itself is moving forward and the different employees are doing what they're supposed to be doing on the project. So with the expectations, again, you mentioned texting your team in the middle of the night. So an expectation could be, you know, I expect you to respond with it by the next business day. You know, you don't have to respond on your weekend or in the middle of the night, because that's interfering with your sleep and your healthy habits that you need to take care of yourself and be able to perform while you're on the job. And then the performance aspect of it. So remote work has kind of driven a lot of anxiety especially for employees, because they're like, oh, well, my boss can't see me working, so how do they know that I'm working or not working? And they're like, oh, well, I need to keep my little status green and active all the time. I can't let it go to away or, you know, out of the office. And yeah, a lot of people are kind of driving themselves crazy over that. And we've seen a lot of people working actually extended hours. Maybe they're logging on 30 minutes to an hour early in the morning. Maybe they're like, oh, just one more thing at the end of the day, and they're not cutting off their day where they need to. the reality is a lot of things some things are kind of urgent in project management, but if you're doing a good job, usually these things are way in advance. So I do procurement, and our contracts are awarded 2 years in advance of when we ever get anything. So nothing's super urgent that it really needs to be done that exact day, unless it's like a tasker coming down, that funding drill or something from the Pentagon, which we get a lot of those. But most things, if you're planning properly, you can look ahead at what's going to need to be done and then prioritize your schedule accordingly. So I think in the book I talk about prioritizing, like the urgent and important things, and then filling in your time with the smaller tasks from there. So taking a big look at what's actually going to move the needle forward for your job and for your team, and making sure that you schedule those into your week and your day, and work on those first before you let all of the little tasks catch up with you. Because if you just constantly are in a reactive mode, you're going to be responding to other people's emails and other people's priorities. And then when you look at, the end of 6 months or the end of the project or the end of the year, depending on kind of how long your timeline is, you'd be like, what did I actually accomplish? I felt like I was busy like crazy responding to all these emails and like all these meetings, but I'm not sure what I actually did that was meaningful. So prioritizing that from the beginning, then you have those measurable goals and the progress that you can measure yourself against, and then also measure your team against, to make sure that you're actually making the progress you need to be making. And then you can clearly articulate the value that you're bringing to your company.
Amazing. You mentioned the planning. We have plans ahead of 2 years ahead. And sometimes we happen to have projects that everything is, we call it, we needed it yesterday. So in this case, you have to run and just do things as they come up, like a firefighting. How you motivate the remote teams?
Can you say that again? Sorry.
How you motivate remote teams?
Okay. So I think this is kind of planning out and connecting to your why or your vision for your team. So connecting your team to the bigger picture of what you're doing, I think can go a long ways towards motivating a team. So one of the weapons that I used to work on is a deterrence weapon. It's rarely actually used, and we all hope they're never used, but it's there for our policymakers to have that credible deterrent, right? So some of the people working on the maintenance and the supply chain parts for that system, it can be really demotivating, because you're like, well, we're never going to use these. But then connecting that back to, hey, our leadership right now is using these weapons and this credible deterrent to negotiate the different policies that we're talking about, and it's preventing, an all-out world war. Those types of things, connecting that meaning behind it, and the things that we do today are going to protect us 10 and 20 years down the road. Articulating that to your team and saying, this part that we were able to rush order and get actually impacted the lives of our airmen and our maintainers, because they were able to keep on their maintenance schedule and they don't have to work an extra weekend. They can have the weekend off and spend it with their families. That type of impact, I think, can help with the motivation and understanding a little bit more of the mission and the meaning behind it. Because when you're behind a computer all the time and you're just focused on your tiny little piece of whatever you're doing, it can be hard to maintain the bigger picture. So as a project manager and a leader, it's really your job to help bring in the bigger vision and connect that so your whole team can see it.
Great, thank you so much. And my last question, and then I will hand it to the audience and answer those questions. My last question will be, what will be the 3 main points that you would recommend the remote team's leader to follow? 3 points.
To boil it down to just 3. So I think being clear in your communication and proactive. Remote work is really all about being intentional and proactive with how you function, how you talk to your team, how you plan out your projects. People aren't necessarily going to come to you and tell you everything that you need to do. As a leader, you're supposed to be proactive and plan that out. So being willing to reach out and initiate communication with people, I think that's your number one takeaway is don't let the digital barrier get to you. You have to reach out and initiate the conversation if you want to have that conversation. Don't expect somebody else to reach out to you. Second is expectations management. So because you can't see the people that you're working with constantly, you can't see what they're doing every single day, 5 days a week. Make sure that you're managing the expectations, what you want them to get done if they're underneath you or if they're part of your project task to you, and when you expect that to happen. So managing those expectations of what needs to happen and when it needs to be done. Don't assume that they know what needs to happen when you need it to. So if there's a deadline that you guys need to meet, make sure everybody is aware of all the tasks that need to be done before you get to that deadline. Otherwise, you're going to go way past your schedule because they didn't know that it needed to happen. And then third, I would say that your leadership is the biggest factor into the progress that your team makes and the creative collaboration that you guys have. So that's one thing that I've seen has been a big objective to remote work, especially in the news lately, is that people are saying, oh, you can't be creative, you don't have as good of ideas. Well, how can you get those ideas and connect more often so that spurs those ideas? So whether that's professional development, whether that's some kind of team event, getting to know each other, I think those things and that intentionality can go a long ways towards being able to be successful on a remote team.
Great. Thank you so much. All of them. I gave you hard time squeezing all your recommendations into 3, but it's really worth it. And it's really, for me, it's really big takeaway. And I would recommend to all of our listeners to read the book because it is written in a very friendly manner. It's like your friend giving you advices how to lead the remote teams. So we have questions, I believe. So I haven't looked at the chat, and we have question from Frank. There are indicators that some people on remote team are becoming tired of the virtual team environment, while others seem to have completely adapted to virtual business. How are you balancing this situation to keep your team engaged and motivated? I think partially you answered, but if there are some points that you would like to add.
Yeah, so one thing that we were able to do that I think really helped everybody's morale and motivation was we actually were able to meet up in person for like a team building day. And it was just, we went and played top golf and hit some golf balls and had some food together and just got to talk and laugh. Nothing work related, just got to know each other a little bit face to face. And that was almost a year into me being on that team. So it was kind of funny to actually like see people's faces and get to, be with them in person and just chat with them in a relaxed environment. I think that can go a long ways towards helping your team connect with each other and then build their motivation and engagement as well. Because the more you get to know each other, the more you tend to actually care about each other and want to help each other succeed.
I come up, as a moderator, I take the chance and ask more questions. How you resolve conflicts if there are remotely?
So I think keeping that open door, hopefully your team is coming to you and telling you if there is a conflict between a couple of people, and then getting probably a video chat together would be the best, because then you can see each other's emotions and read each other's faces so that there aren't things left unsaid. But just addressing it head on is usually the approach that I like to take and say, you're upset about, so-and-so said you're upset about this. Can you explain, what you're upset about or what the disagreement is, and maybe we can come to a resolution, get both people's sides and then see if there's some common ground to move forward on.
Still we talk, communicate. Yeah.
Communication is definitely the biggest part to success, especially in a remote environment.
True. And we have a question related to engaging the team. Is there any special training or framework that can be used for that, for engaging and motivating people? Do you know any of the trainings that you could recommend?
I don't have a specific training off the top of my head. I think a lot of my motivation and engagement has come back to like some of the different classes that I've taken related to like vision and mission training. So a very, very high level stuff, but if you can connect like the big stuff down to what you're doing on a daily basis, I think that can go a long ways towards the engagement there. I'd be open to if you guys have any training ideas or know of anything that's out there currently.
Actually, I haven't come up with any of those type of trainings. I've seen lots of icebreakers and I use them so sometimes with my team students and so on. But usually, as you mentioned, I have a like 5-10 minutes at the beginning of the meeting for the personal chat, at the end 5-10 minutes for the personal chat as well. So we have a question from Iragli. Hi Iragli, 2 questions. Are companies compensating the increasing household utility costs for their employees, especially the electricity cost?
So I have not heard of companies doing this yet. Some of them might be allowing like a small stipend. So just speaking from my organization, the DoD is not compensating at all for electricity, internet, or phone usage. They do provide like our laptop and the software on that equipment, but that's basically it. So work from home is basically a benefit right now. We're still kind of in a COVID posture. We haven't really done the full return to office yet. Some offices have. It just kind of depends on the area, what the COVID numbers look like, what the situation is.
I see. Thank you. Second question, according to your observations, does the productivity of remote working employees increased or kept stable? What is the productivity from your point? Has increased or just the same?
I would say we saw a big increase in the beginning, but I don't know that we've seen like increasing returns over time. I think it's been fairly stable over the past year. There was definitely the adjustment, especially with kids not being in school and people on teams having to take care of their kids, help them do school, all while trying to work remotely as well. I think that was quite a learning curve for everybody and learning how to manage those different priorities. So productivity kind of went up and then bounced around a little bit as we started that first school year last year remotely, and then I think it's fairly leveled off now and we're kind of getting into that routine.
What do you think in the future? Should it be left remotely or should it be some balanced on how you see the future?
I'll give the program manager answer. It depends. I think it really depends on what your mission is and what the nature of your work is. So one idea that I think is awesome once travel's a little bit more open and allowed, and once people can get together face to face, is like 1 or 2 times a year having your team do some kind of in-person team building or offsite event. I think can go a long ways towards team morale and cohesion. I think would be really important. So that type of hybrid option, if you're local to your company, then a hybrid option of a couple days in the office and a couple days working from home, I think could be very beneficial. I also know a lot of people that want the fully remote flexibility to go travel. So I think it's going to depend on the unique situation of the industry, the company, and the teams, and just like the nature of the actual tasks that they're doing themselves. If they are creative, having those team building exercises can really spur a lot of creativity. So that happens more often in the office. I'll definitely say that can happen more, but if you're intentional, you can also help encourage that remotely as well.
I see. Thank you. Next question is from George. Alexis, what tools are you using for the team collaboration and tracking the progress of tasks, projects, budgets, etc.?
So working for the government, I don't have a lot of options on like tools that I can use. I'm a little bit limited to what we can have on our networks. But Microsoft Teams has been really useful. They deployed that shortly before the pandemic started, actually. And that's been super useful for scheduling meetings, for messaging each other, for building out different chat groups, and for just monitoring overall progress. Another one that I use is Microsoft Project. So building out project schedules in that, and then tracking to the dates and the different tasks that need to be done under there. And then the other one I use is Excel. So I use a lot of Microsoft Office Suite and planning out, tasks, keeping track and making sure that if there's something that's brought up that needs to be done, whether it's an action item or a different task, making sure I write it down somewhere, right? So if it's just in my mind, it's as good as gone. I like to say my mind is a steel trap, but the reality is project management, we're kind of all over the place sometimes, and we have a lot of different things to keep track of. So writing something down, whether that's, a notebook on your computer or an Excel document, or even if you prefer hard copy notepads, keeping track of things that way.
As you mentioned, some of my friends, even they are very computer savvy, they still use pink and yellow papers for their notes and tasks and use them very good. So
sometimes it's nice to just write something out by hand and keep it in front of you physically.
Yeah, okay. We have a question from Mariam. Mariam, first of all, thank you for the great meeting. Pleasure to have you here. Very useful. Sorry, I joined late. Maybe you have already discussed this part. Kindly, please advise. What's the main recommendation for the team leaders while communicating with newcomers? It's often quite difficult to adapt in the team.
Yes, so that's a really good point. We didn't really touch on newcomers. We talked about us being a newcomer on a new team, but if you have new team members, it's really important to be intentional and bringing them in and making them feel like part of the team, because there is that digital barrier. When you don't know anybody, you're not really sure what's going on, how the team functions, or what you're supposed to do. So reaching out to them several times, probably daily in the first week or 2 weeks, and making sure that they have the resources that they need. If you guys have like a team schedule of the different meetings that are happening and the things that they need to be involved in, definitely communicating that to them. Roles and expectations is really important for newcomers, so they can start to piece together over those first several weeks, what's my role in the team? Where do I bring the most value? What am I supposed to be doing with my day-to-day activities and tasks? And what are the things that I need to be on top of it? And then starting to teach them what are the things that they should expect to anticipate and start to do on their own without you having to tell them. So, you can tell them definitely up front, this is what I need you to do, but then start to transition them over time. Every 2 weeks, I need this report. So, you can plan out if you want to do that a day ahead of time so that you have it ready. That's great. So then they can start to anticipate what you're going to need from them.
I see, thank you. So we have a question from Arif. Do you think there is a need for more frequent regular meetings for remote teams?
So I think more frequent is in context to what you have been doing, right? So again, this depends on how much you've been doing, whether you need more or less. So it also depends on the frequency and the pace of how quickly things move on your project. So I think weekly is a good starting point. And then if you're always just kind of rehashing the same thing, so in defense acquisition, where I work, things move very slowly. It takes a lot of time to get documents signed, to negotiate contracts. Weekly is plenty. Sometimes we do every 2 weeks, and that's enough to report on what's happening. In other projects, like an Agile project, you might be moving really quickly. You might need to have 2 meetings per week. You might need to have a daily stand-up. I know that's really popular in Agile as well. So it kind of depends on the pace of how quickly things are moving and how beneficial that would be. With this one, I would say caution against overusing your meetings, because every hour that your team spends in a meeting like this is an hour that they're not doing the tasks that you're actually paying them to do. So keep that in mind, protect their deep work and their productive time. So avoid overscheduling meetings if they're not necessary. I would say work out that pace that's good for you to get the updates you need and make sure everyone's on task without overdoing it.
I see. And I think we have last question or comment from Kapil. He's saying there are issues with MS Team. Searching is too weak. Also better to have Zoom or others. There is no any automated process to manage these activities. Do you have any knowledge of the same?
As far as, so I don't have an option on mine because it's pushed down from the Department of Defense. That's the tool we have available. On my personal computer, if I'm connecting, obviously for this book, we're doing it on Zoom. If I have other collaborations or other things that I'm doing outside of my actual day job and I'm on my personal computer, I tend to use Zoom a lot more just because it's convenient. I can integrate it with my Google Calendar and that type of thing. There are a lot of different tools out there. So I would say, talk to your company, see what your company provides you for tools, what that standard is, and then also be willing to keep abreast of what's out there in the industry. So like a lot of people will use Slack as well for communication, not video planning necessarily, but for messaging and different things like that. So keep abreast of what tools are available. And if your company's open to it, maybe introducing some of those tools or testing them out on your personal time. And then if you think they work really well and they could work for your team, then seeing if you can bring those in.
Great. Wow. 1 hour has passed and I think it was like really interactive and really involving. The questions which really are dear to my heart, and I'm sure there are more questions since we are developing, but we have to end this session. And as Alexis offered kindly, every 10th registered, is it right, Alexis? Am I getting it right? We'll get free copy of your book.
Yes, so I just dropped 2 links in the chat. The first one is if you guys just want to go directly to Amazon and either get the ebook, the audiobook, or a paperback sent to you right away, there's the Amazon link. And then if you would like a signed book, I do have a sign up page. You'll get the first 2 chapters in a PDF for kind of a sample read. And every 10 people that sign up for those sample chapters, I'll be sending out a free signed copy. So that'll be there to look forward to as well.
Thank you so much. And it was a great conversation. There are still a lot more to cover, but as a project managers, we have to be on schedule and on time. So thanks to everybody for being here. Thanks to all for watching this talk. Later on the YouTube, we will share the recording with all the registered. And also we will have other interesting talks with the authors of the PM books. And please join us on the social network. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Alexis. It was a pleasure. It was a real pleasure. It was like a great journey in a virtual team discovery.
Yeah, thank you for inviting me. I think this was a great conversation.